Welcome to Storied Showdown, where Magic the Gathering's lore jumps right off the page and onto the battlefield. Each month, 3 guests and I will pick an official Magic the Gathering story, something published online or even in print, and build a commander deck inspired by that tale. Now, each week, I'll sit down with the guests to dive into why they chose their story, what it means to them, and how they turn it into a playable deck full of flavor, theme, and personal interpretation. And then, well, it all culminates into a final battle. 4 stories, 1 epic commander game. This is Storied Showdown. When stories meet, legends rise. What story did you choose for this challenge? And I'm really curious to know what drew you to it specifically.
Keep Them Alive, which is one of the side stories from Duskmourn. Since I have had my own channel, I have stayed on top of all the stories because it's relevant. Before that, I read most of the stories for years, but at a more leisurely pace. And you go back far enough to times that I wasn't in the game, and there's a whole lot that I just have never read. But I was reading this one in pretty much as soon as they dropped, the day of. And I was in a doctor's office, I think to get some kind of scan or something. It was a little bit scary. So that might have had something to do with it. But I just was weeping in this story. I mean, a lot of Magic stories are good. A lot of them are fun. But this one just gut punched me. It's like, the feels, the kind of reorient your sense of, self. The way that just really powerful stuff can.
Yeah, it's I hadn't read it until I read all of the stories that got submitted, and you are not kidding. It is a roller coaster for sure.
I mean, it's pretty short, but it's
a gut punch. It's a gut punch, I think, is a great way to kind of describe its just the way it impacts you, but so quickly,
Yeah.
If you had to summarize that emotional or thematic core of the story in your own words for viewers that maybe haven't read it or have limited experience with Duskmourn, how would you summarize the theme of this story?
It's kind of what it does, the way it's presented. It's basically the religion or the belief system, rather, of the beasties of Duskmourn, right? Which there's 8 cards of them. They're clearly presented in the set and in the Planeswalker's Guide is just one of these things that exist within the world of Duskmourn, and they protect kids, and they don't want their face to be seen. And that's kind of all we know about them. And so suddenly we see this world, the world of Duskmourn, from their perspective, and we get this incredible sense of purpose that I wasn't expecting, because they're called beasties. They seem bestial. They seem instinct driven. And to some degree, they do seem to be. But this is the story of how they find their purpose. And it is fulfilling and sort of relatable. And it's alien yet relatable, which seems like it shouldn't work, but it does.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's always those. I think good writing can make the most alien concepts seem relatable. I think that's why we can have such hard-hitting stories that take place in different, universes entirely to our own, with different races of beings involved in situations we could only dream of, or some that we can't even dream of, But there's always that human aspect to it, just because we're kind of forced to include ourselves when we're writing anything really.
What I think may be happening with this story is that's because it gives you the perspective of the characters in it are kind of alien from you, but this search for purpose and finding purpose is so relatable. It kind of just makes it apparent that that's a universal theme.
Were there any particular characters or moments in this story that really have stuck with you, or you felt particularly connected with while you were reading?
It's really short on characters. I think the only named character is Spindlewhite, who is sort of the first beastie. Probably not chronologically first, but the one who goes out and finds the beasties their meaning. And spoilers, he basically stumbles on a fight between some humans and one of the cellar spawn, I think, but definitely one of the just creepy evil denizens of the house. and he's too late to save parents, but he fights off the baddie, and the dying parent says, "Please keep my children alive," and that becomes his purpose. And from then on, they call them keep alives. And he goes back and I guess demonstrates this to the other beasties, and that's what they do from then on. They find children, orphans basically, and keep them alive.
It's beautiful. It really is. Yeah, it's when you're reading a story like this, when you're interacting with these, you know, themes, these moments, these emotions that can feel so heavy, you know, were you seeing real world parallels or, you know, personal experiences in your own life that you felt, you know, comparable to these, you know, this heft, this weight that's taking place in the story?
You know, not consciously, but maybe that's part of why it hits me so hard, because, you know, I lost a baby, you know, at childbirth. And that is not something I think about often, because that's hard, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't think that relates to this, but maybe, you know, maybe at some subconscious level. But I mean, I feel like it's a pretty universal thing in human cultures that children should be protected, right?
It's interesting though that in their pursuit of finding purpose, their purpose ends up being, you know, protecting these children. If you could, in many sets, and I don't think Duskmourn really separates itself too far from that. There are some sets where it deviates, but in most Magic the Gathering sets, color plays a massive role in the storytelling, the creatures, the world building, all of that. If this story in general had to be described a color or color pairing in the Magic the Gathering ethos, what would you assign the story as a whole?
I might be just defaulting to how it's presented in the set, but Selesnya, because there's two things here. There's the true nature of the beasties, which they're sort of discovering, which feels very green to me. It is their place in the world. And then there's white, which is protection and collectiveness and cooperation. The beasties have their own colony, it seems, which has their own rules that they're passing on from one to another. And that's tradition. Yeah. And that's also kind of overlapping with green. So I think that's it. And survivors, or the archetype in Duskmourn is Selesnya. So there you go. Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with it being the same, you know, color pairing that is presented in the actual game. I think that is just a testament to how much they thought of this story as they were creating these cards and placing these creatures into the set itself. I think it just means that they did a good job world building that this story, without, you know, even really denoting those colors outright to you, you still felt those colors in the storytelling itself. Now that we've kind of talked about the story, we have a lot of the understanding as to why this story, you know, really kind of resonated with you. And I'd like to start talking about the deck. When you started building this deck, I'm curious to know where you began. Did you begin with a character? Did you begin with a mechanic in mind, or did you just begin with a certain vibe?
So there is no Spindlewhite card, and this is I keep going on tangents and tirades about how much I love the side stories in general, in comparison to the main stories, which apparently is not that uncommon a preference. But side stories often they're about characters who don't get cards. They weren't created to shoehorn in, you know, merchandising for a character, which is partly why they are able to be as good as they are, I think. But on the other hand, you know, they don't get as well supported in the game. So I had to, if I was going to build a deck around this story, I had to basically find out how to represent the main named character Spindlewhite in there. So I assume that should be the commander. And I went looking, and I discovered that there is a beast in the right colors as defined by in Duskmourn. Beasties are red and green, and there's also one important beastie card, Toby Beastie Befriender, who is white and makes a white beastie token. So it's got to be Naya, and Marath, Will of the Wild, is who I picked up for that. It's it's a beast. It's the right colors, and just the look of the art. It's a weird amalgam of stuff. Like, this could be from Duskmourn. Spindlewhite, the name sounds like it's got to have some more spider elements to me, and so I feel like if they make the card someday, it will. But that's where I started, and from there it was mostly it builds itself. Partly because you suggested that we should primarily be drawing from the set, right? And so there's just one Duskmourn set, and so this is what I'm doing, just survivors. It's a survivor theme, primarily.
I think that ties beautifully in with the story being finding purpose. Their purpose is to sort of, protect and cultivate these survivors. So I think, so you already kind of, you already talked about your commander, the choice that you made. So what is it about the command? Is it strictly the colors and the creature type, or are there elements to the commander you chose as mechanics or story itself that kind of reflect the story at all?
No, I need the aesthetic to match.
Yeah,
just that is a thing I need in commander anyway, and so there was only really one choice there, so the mechanics were very secondary.
Hey, completely valid. Yeah. Did you include any specific cards that either referenced scenes or characters or like major themes of this story?
Yeah, I've got the way I have it divided up in Archidect. I very rarely rely on the standard categories. Instead, I'm putting a sweepers, removal, and ramp and everything, rather than living in like card type. But so this one, I just put a story beats and protection, because it's sort of the theme, right? And so I think I have 12 cards in here, and these are largely the places where I dipped out of Duskmourn.
Sure.
Or Duskmourn Commander, because things just make sense. Some of them are from Duskmourn. Cathartic Parting kind of references the end of Keep Them Alive, which is just phenomenal, and I'm going to not spoil that. I'm not going to spoil the gut punch,
no,
but
the people need to read it. But
yeah, they do. But other than that, I put Crawl Space in, which I think was originally from one of the Commander sets.
I think so, yeah.
And this one is purely a mood thing. Like, the art of the claustrophobic tunnel, that is just super Duskmourn. And being such a protective thing, keeping the bad things away, that felt right. I also have Sphere of Safety in there for the same reason. Shard Mage's Rescue's also a Duskmourn card, but the rescue is just, this pivotal moment in the Beastie's history. I have Selfless Savior and Selfless Spirit, same sense. A Survivor's Bond, which is an Ikoria card that I hadn't really recalled because I wasn't playing a lot during Ikoria.
Yeah.
But it's return one human or one non-human creature from your graveyard to your hand, or both. And the art has, a human and a beast, non-human, but it's the same sense. But probably the most poignant inclusion I have here is Protective Parents from Wilds of Eldraine. And when they die, create a young hero role token. And that's not exactly what happens here, but it's the story is.
It's a beautiful homage to that moment, for sure. So, obviously, for this deck, with it being Duskmourn, only one set, you're really building mostly around theme, and around set as much as possible. But were there any story beats that were hard to translate into deck? I would love to know kind of what those were, and if you worked around it in any way. I would also love to know that.
I think this is sort of an unusual story in terms of, well, Magic games play out generally as the story of a conflict, right? I mean, that's what every game is, and that's what a lot of stories in general are. But this one is kind of different. This is kind of a statement of purpose, and there is this story of conflict right in the middle, where Spindlewhite goes out, searches for purpose. And you know what? That point, searching for a purpose, I have a couple of cards here in my maybe board, which they aren't Duskmourn cards, and so I just wasn't sure, but I have Journey of Discovery, which I could sub in for one of my ramp cards, and that is just kind of the perfect statement.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's really a search for meaning, and I recall looking up all of these phrases. But I like Journey of Discovery, and then In Search of Greatness, the Kaldheim card.
Yeah, In Search of Greatness is excellent. I love that. Would you say that that's a, were you able to work that kind of searching as a theme in the deck? Are you scrying or anything like that?
Not really. And I have those cards on the maybe board right now,
Okay.
but I can bring them in.
Yeah, I mean, hey, look, you don't have to. I'm just thinking. I'm just enjoying the conversation.
But then the other, I guess there's two other story beats that came up. One, I've kind of alluded to all the selfless spirit, self-savior stuff, but there's heroic intervention.
Naturally.
Which is just the perfect description of what Spindle White does there.
Yeah.
And then that actually emerged from the Cocoon, which is just a card from Duskmourn. And we got to ignore the art for this one in terms of how it applies to this story, because this isn't about a human. This is about the beginning of the story is, a adult, a senior, a mentor beastie talking to a young beastie who's about to start their journey and refers to you came from the Cocoon.
Yeah.
So it's clear that most organisms in Duskmourn spend some time in cocoons.
When you were building this deck, how did you balance staying true to the story that you had chosen while making the deck, but also kind of wanting to make sure that the deck still functions in a game of Commander?
We're going to see if it functions. I play a lot of draft and not much of anything else. And so my perspective gets warped. But also, like, Survivors were the worst archetype in this format. And so I was kind of sad I didn't get to play with it much because it didn't work very well. So now I have loaded all the Survivor cards in here, everything that supports that theme, ways to make Survivors tap without getting into combat and stuff.
Well, I'm interested to see then if maybe Survivors just aren't good, limited, but in a constructed format, maybe they're great.
They could be, but I really leaned into the flavor rather than the mechanics. So if I was trying to make it work, I probably would have included a lot more vehicles and other things like Springleaf Drum, things that would let me tap it. But I really, really leaned pretty heavily into the flavor of either the story in particular or the set in general.
Now we have a lot of experience playing Magic and seeing the decks that we build and stuff like that. So I know that in general, you build incredibly well functioning decks, but you always have this unique ability to still make them incredibly flavorful or thematic. The Reaper King deck will always come to mind. Only cards with pumpkins in them, and I think that is it's so brilliant and beautiful. So I already kind of know how you approach deck building normally. Yeah. Was this process different from you? Was this creative constraint anything new for you?
Yeah, it was very fun because usually I think I would feel compelled to find more powerful cards. But in this case, I was only letting myself pull something that wasn't from Duskmourn, which means it's a whole lot of commons and uncommons and, draft-oriented power level cards. I would only let myself pull in something that wasn't that if it was a perfect flavor fit, and that's pretty much the list we went through already.
When you sit down with this deck, we've talked about how it's constructed, we've talked about how the story is reflected in most of the cards that you pick. When you sit down with this deck, either with us for this game, or if you ever take it and play with anybody else, what would you hope that people understand or feel when they see your deck being played?
I definitely want people to notice all the beasties, because I have every beastie creature card and every card that just has art of a beastie, and there's only 10 of these, or 9 of these. So it's a pretty small sample size, but I want them to be recognized. But I think you can't really convey this story that well in any level of detail, but you can convey the mood of the story, that sense of protecting. And protecting, I guess, usually means turtling up in Commander, and I do have, the Crawl Space and the Sphere of Safety, but those are the only 2 spells that I have that are, protect me, protect the deck, protect the player. Most of it is about protecting the creatures. And so you as another player at the table, if you aren't playing in this particular game, I'd be like, why are you saving this derpy little, 1/1 that doesn't do much, but that's why, because that's what we're doing here.
Hey, we live and we die by the bit, you know?
Yeah,
We live
yeah,
and we die by
right.
the bit. In general, obviously I'm super appreciative that you agreed to do this, and I'm even happier to know that you enjoyed this process. But because you enjoyed this process, do you think that storytelling has a place in the gameplay itself? How important is flavor to you when you're playing a game of Commander?
I don't know that it changes that much in Commander. Flavor is a paramount importance to me in deck building. But storytelling, I feel like when Magic was brand new and I Am Ancient of Days and was there in almost the beginning, I came in between the Dark and Fallen Empires. And at that time, the published story, they had just had like one novel out, and most of what we had to go on was the little short story in the manual, and that left everything really open. And so the story of Magic really was, you're a planeswalker and your opponent's a planeswalker and you're fighting about something, and it wasn't clear what the physical scope of that battle was or what the temporal scope was. Is this an hour fighting over a field? Is it something that goes over years? But that is what played out every time. And I certainly, back at that beginning stage, I was very invested in, oh yeah, this is my army of goblins, and I was imagining the army of goblins, and I thought about that a lot. As I've played probably tens of thousands of games now, the novelty of that is significantly decreased. But I guess when I am actively playing now, I'm not spending a lot of time in that headspace. But when I'm deck building and when I'm looking at cards, and I spend a lot of time just looking through sets, the storytelling absolutely is what plays out. And this ties into my sort of distaste for the main story as opposed to side stories. I don't want so much of it spelled out. I don't like story spotlight cards. I've never liked that they do that. I want Magic to be all these pieces that you can put together in different ways and tell your own stories.
I think I've probably been spoiled in the fact that since I started playing Magic, there was already, 2 decades of established lore and books that I could read and comics that I could read and, the web series even at that point in time. So I guess, for me, I never really think about Magic pre-story. What a beautiful connection you must have had to the cards that you play with and the decks that you create. Yeah, do you ever long for those times again, or are you happy with, the fact that you get an established story and with, lore and all and world building and all that?
It's not sort of a sideways answer, but I kind of wish they had never introduced Planeswalker cards. Okay. Because that's the thing that I think removes the specialness the most, or it just causes the most cognitive dissonance, because if we, the players, are planeswalkers, we're doing such a different thing than what planeswalker cards do. Yeah. And it sort of makes me extra aware that I'm not occupying that same space. But I don't know.
I have heard that from people, and I wonder if it is I don't want to say generational thing, because you are not anywhere near old, nor old enough for me to mention a generational gap. But I do wonder if, like, game wise, it's a generational thing of people that remember being the planeswalkers, versus now when you start playing, like, with my kiddo, I didn't even introduce the idea that they were a planeswalker.
Yeah, you just don't need to.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And I want to be entirely clear, I have no objection to the mechanics of the Planeswalker cards. And I don't think they've ruined the game by any means. Like, this is a minor nitpick. Yeah, I just think they detract a little bit from that element of the way I enjoy the game. But I still get a ton of enjoyment for the game.
I don't think the take is hot enough that you need to defend yourself. I don't think anyone's going to be rioting with pitchforks or anything like that.
Well, in that case.
Moving forward, though, with Magic and you as a player, are there any other Magic stories that you'd like to turn into a deck someday? Now that you've done it for at least one,
it feels like recency bias, but the Teamer story was real. And I think you told me last time we talked that I hadn't gotten through them yet, and you were like, the Teamer story is going to get you. Like, yeah,
and it did, right?
It had, and once again, in the same way that the Elspeth passages really just hit me, and I couldn't understand why.
Yeah.
I don't really understand why this Temur story hit me the way it did, but like, it's not as strong as Keep Them Alive,
No.
but it's kind of the
It's
same type
so
of effect.
good. K. Arsenal
It is.
Rivera did an incredible job. Together Survives the Pack as my favorite of the Tarkir side stories by a good ways. But yeah, and I actually, it's not the story that I built for this, but I did build a deck based off of Together Survives the Pack because I also
Nice.
really enjoyed it. So I'm happy to see that you also enjoyed it. I love the, it was, it's being called one of the weaker of the color identities for Dragonstorm, and I just don't agree with that. So
Oh, in the Commander world?
yeah.
I'm just so fixed in draft. I'm like, what are you talking about? Temur's great, but okay, that makes sense.
I got like, what was it, like 6 out of 8 wins or whatever in a limited draft on
Nice.
Running Temur. So
Yeah. So does that mean the deck you build has Eshki and Surek and their the
yes,
besties?
it's got Eshki, it's got Surek, it's got Ureni, it's got it has.
Did you get a character to represent the Twice Speaker or Twice Whisper or what it was?
No, I wanted to. When I played it, I got to play it in a Tarkir story spotlight game with Kurohitsuki, and I essentially just told the story as I was playing it. I just took over the role of the Twice Whisperer myself.
Oh, okay. I joined that stream late and I missed all the setup.
Yeah, so it's just essentially I was the Twice Whisperer in this scenario. But yes, I
okay.
did.
Oh, that's awesome.
I am the Twice Whisperer facsimile.
Excellent. Well, congratulations.
Now, as we come to a close, I'm gonna leave the floor for you because I'm gonna ask you probably the biggest question of this whole thing, and what do you hope that people take away from this episode when we sit down and we play our game, or when they watch this interview and they hear you talk about the story? If they go and they read the story themselves, whether it's your story, your deck, the process that you described of connecting lore and gameplay, what do you hope people take away from this whole experience?
I hope people read that story, and if it hits anyone with half the impact it hit me, it'll hurt for a bit, but what it did for me is just kind of make me sit back and reset and think about, what's important in life, which different people have different personalities and different problems. I tend to get really focused on all the things I have to do and get real lost in the weeds and lose perspective. And I really need things that will occasionally make me just sit back and breathe and think about what's important. And this is that kind of story. And that's my favorite kind of fiction. Yeah.
Well, there it is, guys. The second installment of Storied Showdown. In this interview, Derek and I really got to dive into a lot of what makes storytelling so relevant to gameplay and deck construction, the emotions that we feel as we are reading these stories, whether consciously or, in Derek's case, subconsciously, heavily impact the cards we choose, the elements of the story that stand out to us most. And that is really what I find most fascinating about this project so far, is the way that everyone interprets this challenge in a different way, the way everyone encounters deck building in a different and unique way. And I think that really speaks to how we all, as a community within Magic the Gathering, build our decks and explore this game with each other. And I think it's just beautiful. So if you agree, if you thought this was beautiful, don't forget that down below, not only will the story be linked, but also Derek's deck that he created based on this story will be linked below as well. Thank you so much for watching. And don't forget to follow Derek at Mana Critics here on YouTube, at Derek of Mana Critics on BlueSky. You can find his band on SoundCloud, Longing for Orpheus. Incredible music. Highly recommend you check it out. I will see you next week for the final interview installment of Storied Showdown.